Hi, this is Ed Ballum. I'm from Cygnus Business Media, staff writer, and we're here in Dallas at 2010 Expo, and we have Dr. Bryan Bledsoe here today. Dr. Bledsoe is an emergency physician in Midlothian, Texas, and Las Vegas, Nevada. He began an EMS service in 1974 as an EMT and attended one of the first paramedic schools in northern Texas. Dr. Bledsoe, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
Now, you're known for an article you used to write, a series of articles called EMS Myths. Are there any that continue to persist today, myths in the EMS?
Well, first of all, Nancy Perry published that. And the story, the backstory on that, it'll involve the competing magazine, but I wrote it, and AJ knows about this. I wrote that up for Jim's. And AJ, he'd just been hired at Jim's, and this is too controversial. And so I was just lamenting it on some listserv, and Nancy said, we'll publish it. So I said, okay, here it is. Then I remember writing with Jim Page before he died, obviously, and AJ, he just chewed AJ out for not publishing that series. But that's the backstory. Yeah. Of those 8 myths, then they involve such things as critical incident stress management, steroids for spinal cord injury, TPA for stroke, system status management, lights and sirens. Most of them remain true. The one that's probably was the least true was the interventions for stroke. Right. At the time that was written, that was 2003 or something of that nature. The interventional things for stroke were still very preliminary, and that's now been fleshed out. But if you look at the other things, system status management, certainly there's arguments. I still think it's a myth. The lights and sirens use. This is something that's starting to come around. Fort Worth, again, my hometown, they've started transporting cardiac arrest without lights and sirens because there's really no need once you've resuscitated them and induced therapeutic hypothermia. Steroids for spinal cord injuries not raised its head again. One of the big things, though, is the air medical situation. I took a lot of heat over the 2 things that are the most controversial were the air medical and the critical incident stress management. That deal stepped on some toes. But and here we are in 2010, and there's been a rash of crashes this year. It's HEMS, helicopter EMS, is certainly important, but it's just out of control. As we sit here in Dallas, there's 20 or so helicopters within 90 nautical miles. Wow. And same with Phoenix. Fortunately, in Las Vegas, we don't see many because the county, Clark County, requires twin engines. But talk to any paramedic who will be honest, or any flight crew member. And they will admit that the vast majority of what they're transporting could readily go by ground. And I've actually partnered with Mike Abernathy, who's a physician at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, to kind of address usage more at a physician level. Because what I'm seeing, at least in my practice, is the abuse is not so much now from the field providers, it's from other hospitals. They're just dumping crap on us. I've gotten sore throats by helicopter. Diabetic ketoacidosis with a blood sugar of 296 by helicopter that we see, hydrate them up and discharge them. And then they're standing on the front of the hospital because they're now 90 miles away from home without a ride. And it's not the flight crews and it's not the pilots. It's the big industry that runs it. I mean, it's several big corporations that report to stockholders, and they're doing what we all want to do in America, but $17,000 for a ride to the hospital is pretty expensive.
It really is. And then I'm from New Hampshire, and I'm an EMT up there, and providers have the right to call for a helicopter, and sometimes not necessarily with full knowledge about the patient, and you get the $17,000 helicopter ride coming down there. So there must be some way that can you think of a way that maybe can help that a little bit?
Not really, because the courts have ruled consistently that helicopters are basically covered under the Airline Deregulation Act, which I guess Jimmy Carter signed, and really federal law can't touch them. Here in Texas, when I was on the governor's task force on trauma, the medical directors committee, we wanted to require air conditioning on a helicopter. Not an unreasonable expectation here in Texas. Well, they threatened to sue us, one of the operators, and we got an attorney general's opinion from the Texas Attorney General said, no, you can't do that. And so they know they can't be touched. And what they do, and it happens a lot in your part of the country, and especially western Pennsylvania, and to a limited degree here in the Midwest, where they very heavily market to the providers.
Right.
Say, oh, don't worry, we don't mind turning around and going back. Well,
somebody's getting a bill.
Yeah, they do mind turning around and going back, because they don't transport, they don't have a chance to bill. And,
right.
Hardly a month or two goes by, I don't get a call from an investigative reporter looking into a complaint. I mean, one happened here in Fort Worth last week, had a call on one in Las Vegas. In that case, I thought the transport was appropriate, but it's uncontrolled. It reminds me of the ambulance business in the 70s when I got into it. Okay. There were areas here over in Fort Worth that were unincorporated. And when a call came into those areas, it was no man's land. And we would do crazy things, like we'd pull up behind the ambulance who got there before us so they couldn't get their stretcher out. And I remember one guy taking the keys out of the ambulance and throw it in the bushes. And then they would dispatch fake calls
to make them go the other way.
I mean, I tell those stories and people don't believe it, but they are true. Yeah. It got a lot worse than that, actually.
Well, that's the way it was.
So. And before that, it was the wreckers.
Right.
So a couple things will happen for the helicopter. There is a good push within the helicopter industry, primarily from the hospital-based provider called the Patient First Alliance, which is trying to make reasonable use of helicopters and to place the safety devices. The NTSB has come down about as hard as the NTSB can come down on the helicopter operators for safety, but the NTSB has no statutory authority to enforce things. It goes to the FAA. The FAA hasn't done anything. We had hearings in February of 2007, I guess, or 2008 on that, and nothing has happened. So eventually the FAA will probably come down. There was a bill introduced in the last Congress to tie reimbursement of helicopters under Medicare to the level of safety provided, but with the Obamacare and all the crap that's going on in Washington, it never really got out of committee. But the thing is, we're starting to see is that we're seeing that the third-party payers, the Humana Health Cares and the Blue Cross Blue Shield, are starting to look with much more scrutiny. But what that means is they're just going to pay less. That doesn't mean they're going to go back after the patient. And I have had patients come in my emergency department and say, I didn't want to come by helicopter. They made me.
Yeah. They didn't have a choice.
So here they come. It was a fun ride. I
wish I was sitting up.
But you could get a first-class ticket to Sydney, for the same amount, and back.
And back. Yeah. Well, and getting back to safety, are there things that providers can do for aviation safety, helicopters, and what can we do as providers?
Well, I mean, we can. Safety of the operation of the airship is certainly in the domain of the pilot. Right. There's actually a pressure on the pilots to usurp that authority, which hopefully will never happen. I think it's just assuring that when you're calling, the patient really stands to benefit. Right. The current criteria, which is widely circulated in EMS for helicopter usage, is derived from the American College of Surgeons document on pre-hospital triage and trauma triage. The American College of Emergency Physicians actually has a much more succinct document, which is what we've promoted in writings we did in a couple of physician magazines, such as Emergency Physicians Monthly. That is, look at does a patient require a quality of care not available by ground? And are they more than 45 miles or 45 minutes from the hospital, 30 minutes in some circles? Is there an ingress-egress issue? Is there a disaster situation? And just by following the ASAP criteria, flights would be cut in half. Right. But nobody wants to talk about that because, more flights is more dollars.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's always the same way, even with fire apparatus and with ambulances and cruisers, everything. Keep them off the road, they're less likely to get in accidents and have mishaps. Yeah. So if we can...
I don't remember an EMS, other than perhaps marketing to the dialysis centers and the nursing homes, being real aggressive about going after business. And that's just inter-competitive, but when you're talking about a technology that's so expensive, and there was actually the data that Dr. Abernathy showed that, what other medical procedures do we do, cardiac catheterization or something, where there's as much risk to the crew performing the care as there is to the patient? There's really not. I mean, what would happen if every 50,000 cardiac caths, everybody in the lab died? there would be an outrage. But it's the same thing.
Same thing.
But they're sexy. You know, nothing like, you know, if you work...
Makes great pictures.
Yeah, you spray paint in a little Ford dealership, and, you know, you're on the volunteer fire department, and the big one hits on the interstate. That's the stuff of legend, you know. And, you know, we were all in EMS and had those sort of things. But, gosh, we got to think. I mean, the primary dictum of medicine is first do no harm.
Do no harm.
And as healthcare professionals, whether you're a physician or a nurse or a paramedic, EMT, you know, the patients don't understand what we do very well, other than what they see on TV, which is wrong. And then they depend on us to act in their best interest. Mm-hmm. Are we? Are we acting in their best interest, or is it because we got a pizza dinner from the local helicopter service, or, you know?
They think that we're acting in their best interest when we try to bring the helicopter in, but maybe not.
Yeah. It's an interesting situation, but I've had my say, basically. I've moved on to other things, and, you know, what can you do? You point out the problems, everybody knows about it, somebody else has got to fix it.
But Dr. Bledsoe, thank you
for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.